The vast archive chamber of the Galactic Library stretched endlessly in all directions, its crystalline walls housing millennia of knowledge. Professor Kithrix's forehands moved in perfect synchronization across the holographic interface, each finger trailing streams of data through the air. The professor's scales shifted from their usual scholarly azure to a troubled violet as they noticed something peculiar in the records. "Display Human Diplomatic Encounter 2478 Beta," they commanded. The system responded instantly, projecting a detailed account of first contact between humans and the Meridian Alliance. The text flowed smoothly until the crucial moment of cultural exchange, then simply stopped. Not redacted, not classified, just empty. Kithrix's inner eyelids flickered in confusion. System, verify data integrity. The library's quantum processors hummed. Data integrity verified. No corruption detected. No redaction protocols active. The professor had seen missing data before. Every species had its secrets, but this was different. They called up another record, this time of a human scientific expedition to the Carina Nebula. Again, the same pattern emerged. The record detailed the approach, the initial surveys, and then nothing. The emptiness in the records felt deliberate, yet unlike any censorship Kithrix had encountered in their 3 centuries of academic research. Their curiosity piqued. Kithrix expanded their search parameters. Records from the Centauri Accords, the Mars-Jupiter Treaty, the Orbital Rights Convention. Each contained similar gaps. The missing sections always occurred at moments of significance, as if reality itself had chosen to look away. Cross-reference all instances of data absence in human-related records, Kithrix instructed. The library systems began to process the request, but something unexpected happened. The holographic displays flickered, showing fragments of impossible data. Text that appeared to read differently each time Kithrix looked at it, numbers that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The professor's scales rippled with excitement. In all their years of research, they had never encountered anything like this. They reached for their personal data tablet, attempting to document the phenomenon, but found that even their own equipment refused to properly record these anomalies. A soft chime indicated the arrival of another researcher. Arch-Scholar Venrex glided into the chamber, their ceremonial robes trailing wisps of light. "Professor Kithrix, I noticed your extended queries about human historical records." Kithrix turned all 4 eyes toward their superior. "Arch-Scholar, I've discovered something fascinating. The records are incomplete in certain areas," Venrex interrupted, their scales shifting to a warning shade of deep crimson. "This is known. But the pattern, the consistency of the gaps." "Professor," Venrex's voice took on an unusual tone, one that made Kithrix's survival instincts tingle. "Some mysteries are best left unexplored. The Galactic Council has determined that these gaps serve a greater purpose." Kithrix's scientific curiosity battled with their ingrained respect for authority. "With all due respect, Arch-Scholar, how can missing knowledge serve any purpose?" Venrex moved closer, their voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Consider, Professor, why every species in the galaxy maintains these same specific omissions. Consider why even our most advanced AI systems cannot process certain aspects of human activity. Consider why, in 9,000 years of galactic civilization, no one has successfully documented these missing moments." The Arch-Scholar turned to leave, then paused. "And consider, carefully, whether you wish to continue this line of research. Some questions, once asked, cannot be unanswered." Left alone in the vast chamber, Kithrix stared at the hovering displays of incomplete data. Their scales had shifted to the deep blue of intense thought. The Arch-Scholar's warning should have deterred them. Instead, it had confirmed something crucial. These weren't just random gaps in the records. They were looking at a deliberate pattern of impossible silence, maintained across thousands of years and hundreds of species. And now, more than ever, Kithrix needed to understand why. The meditation colony on Proxima VI, hung suspended in perpetual twilight, its crystalline domes refracting the light of 3 distant suns. Professor Kithrix adjusted their environmental suit as they approached the residence of Captain Zixtal, trying to ignore the way their scales itched in the planet's unusual atmosphere. The captain's dwelling stood apart from the others, its walls adorned with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in an unsettling rhythm. Kithrix activated the door chime, and a voice responded immediately, though the door remained closed. "You're the researcher from the Galactic Library." It wasn't a question. "Come in, but leave your recording devices outside." Kithrix hesitated, then placed their data tablet and neural scanner in the exterior storage compartment. The door dissolved, revealing a spacious chamber filled with star charts and holographic displays of space battles frozen in time. Captain Zixtal stood by a panoramic window, their once impressive frame now bent with age, their ceremonial military carapace, still polished to a mirror shine, bore the marks of countless battles. All 6 of their eyes focused on Kithrix with unsettling intensity. "You wish to know about the Epsilon incident," the captain said, mandibles clicking softly. "Why?" Kithrix moved closer, noting how the captain's auxiliary limbs twitched at their approach. "The records show your fleet encountered a single human research vessel, 6 warships against 1 civilian craft. Yet you ordered a full retreat." "Ordered?" Zixtal's carapace shifted colors rapidly. "No, Professor. We fled." The captain moved to a control panel, bringing up a tactical display of the encounter. "We detected their vessel conducting unauthorized scans of a restricted sector. Standard protocol. We surrounded them, demanded surrender." Their voice grew distant. They were compliant at first. The human captain apologized, claimed they'd drifted off course. "What happened then?" "Their engines were damaged. We offered to escort them to the nearest outpost for repairs, but their engineer—" Zixtal's carapace paled to an almost translucent white. "Their engineer said they had a different solution." The captain manipulated the display, showing the human vessel surrounded by the patrol fleet. "Watch the sensor readings." Kithrix leaned forward, all 4 eyes widening as the data streams became increasingly chaotic. "This can't be correct. These energy patterns violate fundamental laws of physics." "Keep watching." The numbers spiraled into impossible configurations. Space itself seemed to warp around the human ship, but not in any way that aligned with known science. Kithrix's academic mind struggled to process what they were seeing. "Their engineer did something," Zixtal continued, mandibles trembling. "Something that made reality disagree with itself. The laws of physics began operating on suggestions rather than rules. My crew—" The captain's voice cracked. "My most experienced officers broke down at their stations. Some tried to describe what they were seeing, but the words wouldn't form. Our central AI crashed trying to process it. But the human ship repaired itself using principles that shouldn't exist. They thanked us for our patience, apologized for any inconvenience, and left." Zixtal turned all 6 eyes to Kithrix. "I spent 30 cycles in this meditation colony trying to understand what I witnessed, trying to reconcile it with everything I know about the universe." Thrix's scales shifted to the deep purple of intense thought. "Why hasn't this been reported? Studied?" "Oh, many have tried." The captain gave a bitter click. "But tell me, Professor, how do you document something that refuses to be documented? How do you study an ability that makes mockery of the tools you'd use to study it?" Zixtal moved to a shelf, retrieving a small crystal cube. "This contains my personal log from that day. I've tried to play it back thousands of times. Every playback device shows different footage, as if reality can't decide what actually happened." The captain pressed the cube into Kithrix's hands. "Take it. Study it. But remember, some questions don't remain unanswered because we lack the means to answer them. They remain unanswered because we lack the capacity to comprehend the answers." Professor Kithrix's research chamber had transformed over the past week. Holographic strands of data crisscrossed the space like a luminous spider's web, each thread connecting seemingly unrelated incidents involving human activities. Their scales had taken on a permanent shade of deep indigo, the color of obsession. The crystal cube from Captain Sixtel sat in a specialized containment field, its contents still defying analysis. Each attempt to access its data produced different results, as if the recorded events existed in multiple states simultaneously. Kithrix had just finished their 47th attempt at playback when their primary research terminal chimed softly. Cross-reference analysis complete, the system announced. Pattern correlation detected. Kithrix's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as they absorbed the displayed information. Their algorithm had identified 3 distinct incidents that shared impossible similarities. The first, a human colony thriving on Kepler-186f, a planet whose atmospheric composition should have made survival impossible. When asked about their life support systems, the colonists had simply shrugged and mentioned, making do with what they had. The second, the inexplicable repair of the Centauri Deep Space Station. After catastrophic damage from a solar flare, a human maintenance crew had restored it to full functionality in hours instead of the projected months. The repair logs contained only the phrase "creative problem-solving" as an explanation. The third, the resolution of the Proxima crisis, where a human diplomat had somehow negotiated peace between 2 species whose languages were mathematically proven to be mutually incomprehensible. Kithrix's upper appendages moved swiftly across the holographic interface, drawing connections. Their research equipment began to malfunction in familiar ways. Displays showing impossible readings, sensors reporting contradictory data. But this time, they were prepared. Execute Containment Protocol Lambda 7, they commanded. The chamber's quantum processors engage, creating a localized reality stabilization field. The malfunctions decreased, though didn't entirely disappear. Display Timeline Overlay. The holographic web shifted, now arranged chronologically. Kithrix's scales rippled with excitement as a clear pattern emerged. In each case, humans had accomplished something that violated fundamental universal constants. Yet instead of causing reality-breaking paradoxes, the universe had simply adjusted. Their terminal chimed again. Warning. System integrity at 60%. Reality anchors experiencing strain. Kithrix ignored the warning, too engrossed in their discovery. They had found something else. A correlation between human presence and localized fluctuations in probability fields. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but once spotted, it became impossible to ignore. Humans didn't just bend reality. They rewrote its underlying grammar. The professor reached for their data tablet, then froze. On its screen, mathematical formulae were rearranging themselves, shifting between different but equally valid solutions. Even the laws of mathematics themselves seemed uncertain in the face of this investigation. A soft knock at the chamber's entrance interrupted their thoughts. "Enter," Kithrix called out, not looking away from the displays. "Professor." The voice belonged to Junnith, their most promising student. "I brought the historical archives you requested from. What's happening to your equipment?" Kithrix turned to see their student staring in alarm at the research terminals. The quantum processors were cycling through states that shouldn't have been possible, their diagnostic displays showing contradictory readings. "Exactly what should be happening," Kithrix replied, their scales shifting to the bright green of scientific triumph. "Look here. Every instance of unexplained human success follows the same pattern. They encounter an impossible problem, then simply ignore its impossibility." "But that's not how reality works," Junnith protested. "No," Kithrix agreed, all 4 eyes fixed on the dancing data streams. "It's not how reality works for us. But for humans," they gestured at the chaos of their displays. "Reality seems to be more of a polite suggestion than a rigid framework." The warning chime sounded again. System integrity at 40%. Reality anchor failure imminent. "Professor," Junnith's scales had paled to a worried gray. "Perhaps we should continue this another time." But Kethrix barely heard them. They were too focused on the pattern emerging from the chaos, a pattern that suggested something both wonderful and terrifying about their human neighbors in the galaxy. The Intergalactic Cultural Exchange took place in the Grand Crystal Spire of New Geneva, its transparent walls offering a spectacular view of Earth's glittering orbital rings. Professor Kethrix adjusted their ceremonial robes, trying to appear casual among the gathered diplomats, while their scientific sensors quietly recorded everything. Their scales itched with anticipation. After 3 months of research, this was their first opportunity to observe humans up close in a controlled setting. The exchange had drawn representatives from every major species in the galaxy, all gathered under the pretense of cultural dialogue. Professor Kethrix, a human diplomat, approached, wearing the blue and silver uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. "I'm Ambassador Chen. The arch-scholar mentioned you were interested in human-alien interactions." Kethrix's outer eyelids flickered in surprise. They hadn't expected to be noticed. "Yes, I'm conducting research on cross-species communication patterns." Before the ambassador could respond, a commotion erupted near the central display area. A group of children, human and alien alike, had broken away from their designated observation area. Among them, a small human girl, perhaps 7 years old, had become the center of attention. "Watch this," the girl exclaimed, her hands moving in elaborate patterns. Kethrix's sensors immediately began registering anomalous readings. The air around the child's hands seemed to shimmer, not with technology or known energy patterns, but with something else, something that made Kethrix's scientific instruments display conflicting data. The alien children backed away instinctively, their genetic memory triggering ancient warnings. But it was what happened next that made Kethrix's scales fade to pure white in astonishment. The girl was playing with probability itself, making soap bubbles that floated upward instead of down, creating patterns in the air that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space allowed. Each movement of her hands left trailing echoes of possibility, as if reality was offering suggestions rather than enforcing rules. Kethrix's sensors were reporting complete nonsense now. According to their readings, the space around the child simultaneously existed and didn't exist, obeyed physical laws and ignored them, was both here and elsewhere. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Ambassador Chen smiled, seemingly unperturbed by the reality-bending display. "Children have such wonderful imaginations." "Imagination," Kethrix repeated, the word feeling strange in their mouth. "Ambassador, your species calls this imagination." "Of course, though I notice most other species' children tend to be a bit uncomfortable with it at first. Something about different developmental pathways, I believe." Kethrix watched as the girl created shapes that shouldn't be possible, colors that couldn't exist in normal spacetime. Their most advanced sensors were now displaying only one message: error. Invalid parameters. Reality check failed. The professor's scientific mind raced. This wasn't technology. It wasn't even a natural ability as other species understood them. This was something else entirely, a fundamental difference in how humans interface with reality itself. An alien child, a young Meridian, approached the girl cautiously. "How are you doing that?" "I'm just pretending," the girl beamed. "Want me to show you?" The Meridian child backed away quickly, its neural tendrils curling in instinctive fear. Kethrix understood the reaction. They were witnessing something that violated everything they knew about the universe's operations. "Ambassador," Kethrix managed, their voice steady despite their racing thoughts, "do all humans possess this imagination?" Chen laughed softly. "Of course, though some might say adults don't use it enough. We tend to get too caught up in what's possible and impossible. Children are much better at ignoring those artificial limitations." Artificial limitations. Kethrix's scales shifted through a rainbow of colors as the implications hit them. What their species considered fundamental laws of reality, humans considered optional guidelines to be bent, ignored, or rewritten entirely. And they did it so casually, so naturally, that they didn't even recognize it as the reality warping power it was. Deep beneath the crystalline spires of the Galactic Library, in a section so old that the data crystals had begun to fossilize, Professor Kithrix made a discovery that changed everything. Their scales flickered between deep purple and bright gold as they studied the prehistoric cave paintings projected before them. The images came from 12 different worlds, separated by thousands of light years and tens of thousands of years. They shouldn't have had anything in common. Yet each depicted the same impossible beings, creatures that pulled form from void, that shaped reality with thought alone. "Display comparative analysis," Kithrix commanded, their voice barely a whisper in the ancient chamber. The system responded, overlaying the various cave paintings. The similarities were undeniable. The beings in each image shared the same basic form. Bictal, 2 arms, 1 head, human form. But these paintings predated human space travel by millennia. Kithrix's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as they processed this information. Their research terminal hummed softly as it compiled data from various archaeological databases. The oldest painting, found in the crystal caves of Proxima Centauri's 4th planet, dated back nearly 50,000 years. The newest, a mere 15,000 years old, came from the methane ice sheets of Europa. Cross-reference with early contact records, they instructed. The system displayed a timeline, showing humanity's first ventures into space alongside these ancient depictions. The disconnect was striking. How could so many species have recorded encounters with human-like beings long before humans left their planet? Unless... Kithrix's scales rippled with excitement as a new possibility emerged. What if these weren't records of physical encounters? What if they were something else entirely, psychic impressions, perhaps, or some kind of temporal echo? Their thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. The system had found something else, a pattern in the cave paintings' locations. When mapped across the galaxy, they formed a perfect spiral, with Earth at its center. Impossible, Kithrix muttered, but their scientific mind was already racing ahead. They had assumed humanity developed their reality-bending abilities naturally, but what if it was the other way around? What if something had chosen them for this power? The professor accessed another painting, this one from the silicon deserts of Mars. It showed the human-like figures surrounded by swirling patterns that the original archaeologists had dismissed as decorative. But Kithrix had seen those patterns before. In the quantum fluctuations their sensors recorded during the human child's display at the cultural exchange. System, analyze pattern frequency across all samples. The computer hummed, comparing the ancient swirls to modern sensor readings. The match was exact, down to the quantum level. These prehistoric artists hadn't just recorded the appearance of human-like beings, they had somehow captured the very signature of their reality-altering power. Kithrix moved to the next chamber, where physical artifacts were stored. Here, preserved in quantum stasis fields, lay objects that defied analysis. A shell that was bigger on the inside than the outside. A stone that glowed with impossible colors. A piece of pottery that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. All found near the cave paintings, all bearing the same quantum signature as human imagination. The professor's scales shifted to pure white as understanding dawned. Humanity hadn't evolved their abilities through random chance. Something had seen their potential, had recognized in them a capacity that other species lacked. The cave paintings weren't records of past encounters. They were prophecies, predictions of what humanity would become. Thrix's terminal chimed again, displaying a final analysis. The quantum patterns in the artifacts weren't just similar to human imagination. They were identical, as if the same force that had marked these objects had later manifested itself in human consciousness. The professor stood motionless in the ancient chamber, surrounded by evidence of a power that had shaped galactic history long before humans took their first steps into space. Their research had answered one question, only to raise an even more profound one. What force had chosen humanity as its vessels, and why? The abandoned space station hung in the shadow of Jupiter's rings, its ancient hull covered in crystalline frost. Professor Kithrix's research vessel approached cautiously, guided by coordinates found encrypted in the prehistoric data patterns. Their scales shimmered with anticipation as they studied the station's unique architecture. Structural analysis complete, their ship's computer announced. Design confirms precursor origin. Estimated age, 15,000 years. Kithrix engaged their environmental suit, checking the quantum stabilizers twice. After their experiences in the library, they knew better than to approach anything related to human abilities without protection. The airlock cycled, and they entered the station. Emergency lights flickered to life automatically, casting blue shadows through corridors that hadn't seen movement in millennia. Kithrix's sensors detected stable atmosphere behind the next bulkhead, impossible for a station this old, yet undeniably present. The central chamber drew them like a magnet. Its walls were covered in displays that somehow still functioned, showing star charts and data streams that made Kithrix's scientific mind real. At the center stood a crystalline pedestal, its surface etched with familiar quantum patterns. "Begin recording," Kithrix commanded their suit's systems. They placed their hand on the pedestal surface. The chamber transformed. Holographic figures materialized. Members of the precursor species, their forms both familiar and alien. The recording was so perfect that Kithrix could see the subtle shifts in their color patterns, indicating intense emotional distress. "First contact protocol has failed," one figure announced, its colors showing deep concern. "The humans are not as they appear." Another figure moved forward, manipulating a display that showed Earth of 15,000 years ago. "We approached believing we found primitive beings ready for uplift. Instead, the figure's colors shifted to pure white. Terror. Instead, we found something unprecedented." The display showed ancient humans around a campfire. Simple tools, simple dwellings, yet the quantum readings around them matched exactly what Kithrix had observed in the modern era. Even then, humans have possessed their reality-changing power. "They don't see boundaries between possible and impossible," a third figure reported, its patterns showing scientific fascination warring with instinctive fear. "They imagine something, and reality accommodates them. They don't even realize they're doing it." The first figure spoke again. "The containment protocols. Useless. We can't contain something that rewrites the rules of containment. We can't study an ability that defies the tools of study. We can't even properly observe it. Our instruments return different readings each time." Kithrix watched, entranced, as the precursors debated. These beings, whose technology still defied modern understanding, had been terrified not of human weapons or aggression, but of their casual relationship with reality itself. The recommendation: retreat. Establish the silence protocol. Mark their system as restricted until they discover space travel on their own. Most importantly, the figure's colors shifted to deepest blue. Absolute certainty. We must never let them know the true nature of their power. Their ability is limited only by their understanding of it. If they realized what they were truly capable of. The recording showed more scenes. Humans shaping tools that shouldn't work, telling stories that bent probability, dreaming dreams that left quantum echoes in reality. Each casual act violated fundamental laws of physics, yet the humans remained blissfully unaware of their power's significance. "Implementation begins immediately," the first figure declared. "All records will be quantum locked. Any species that discovers humans must be bound by the protocol. They must never know." The recording cut off abruptly, but Kithrix barely noticed. Their scales had shifted to the deep green of revelation. The precursors hadn't hidden this knowledge to protect other species from humans. They had hidden it to protect humans from themselves. Their power was limited only by their understanding of it. As long as humans viewed their abilities as simple creativity and imagination, they remained in balance with the universe. But if they ever realized what they were truly doing each time they imagined something new. Kithrix's sensors began to malfunction, reality rippling around them, as the implications of their discovery resonated through the quantum fabric of space itself. Earth's atmosphere shimmered with an array of colors that Kethrix's sensors couldn't quite categorize. Their shuttle descended through layers of orbital habitats, each one showcasing impossible architectural choices that somehow worked perfectly. Their scales shifted between deep purple and bright gold as they watched humans casually defy physics in their everyday lives. The invitation had come directly from the Earth Council, delivered moments after Kethrix had left the ancient station. Now, standing in a garden that shouldn't exist, roses blooming in patterns that violated basic laws of biology, the professor waited to meet their hosts. Beautiful, aren't they? A human gardener knelt nearby, coaxing a flower into blooming with nothing but gentle words and belief. These are quantum roses. They bloom in every possibility at once. Kethrix's scientific mind reeled. The flowers existed in superposition, yet remained stable without any containment field. Their colors shifted through spectrums that shouldn't be visible to any known species. Professor Kethrix, Dr. Sarah Chen, the same ambassador from the cultural exchange, approached along a path that seemed to create itself with each step. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We believe it's time you understood. Understood what? Kethrix's outer eyelids flickered rapidly. Why we let the galaxy maintain its silence about us. She gestured toward a building that hadn't been there moments before, a structure of crystal and light that hummed with possibility. Please follow me. Inside, Kethrix found themselves in a room that defied spatial logic. Windows looked out on different planets, different times, different possibilities. Children's drawings hung on the walls, each one slightly altering local reality with the pure belief of their creators. You've discovered the precursor records, Sarah stated, offering Kethrix a seat that adjusted perfectly to their alien physiology. You know they chose to hide the truth about us. But do you understand why? Kethrix's scales rippled. They feared what would happen if humans understood their power. Close. Sarah smiled. But not quite right. We've always understood our power, Professor. What we understand, what the precursors understood, is that our power works precisely because we don't see it as power at all. She gestured, and a room filled with holograms of human history. Look at our children. They imagine, and reality complies. Our artists dream, and possibility bends. Our engineers think, and physics adapts. We call it creativity, imagination, innovation, and that's exactly what it is. Kethrix watched as scenes played out. Children playing games that rewrote local space-time, artists creating colors that shouldn't exist, scientists casually violating conservation laws through sheer stubborn belief that their ideas should work. But the readings, the quantum fluctuations, are side effects, nothing more. Sarah's voice was gentle. The moment we started thinking of our imagination as a power to be measured and controlled, it would become exactly that. Limited, defined, constrained by understanding. The truth hit Kethrix with the force of a supernova. Humans didn't bend reality through any special power or ability. They did it by simply never accepting that they couldn't. Their gift wasn't the ability to break the rules. It was the inability to see the rules as anything but suggestions. The silence protocol, Kethrix whispered, scales shifting to brilliant white with revelation. Was our idea, Sarah confirmed. We asked the galaxy to help us maintain our innocence, you might say, to let us keep believing that anything is possible, because the moment we start believing in impossible things, they become impossible, Kethrix finished, understanding at last. The true power of humanity wasn't their ability to alter reality. It was their unshakable belief that reality was always negotiable, combined with the wisdom to never examine that belief too closely. A child ran past the window, leaving a trail of quantum possibilities in her wake, blissfully unaware that she was doing anything remarkable at all. Professor Kethrix stood in their research chamber for the last time, surrounded by the accumulated data of their investigation. The quantum crystalline displays showed thousands of documented cases of human imagination reshaping reality, each one more impossible than the last. Their scales shifted through a rainbow of colors as they contemplated what needed to be done. The research terminal hummed softly, waiting for the command to transmit their findings to the Galactic Scientific Council. One signal would share the truth about humanity with every species in known space. Their outer eyelids flickered as they remembered the words of Dr. Chen. The moment we see it as power, it becomes merely power. Kithrix's appendages moved over the controls, but not to transmit. Instead, they began the deletion sequence. Professor, Junith stood in the doorway, their scales showing concern. The Council is waiting for your report on human capabilities. There will be no report, Kithrix replied, watching as months of research dissolved into quantum noise. Some truths aren't meant to be documented. Some mysteries solve themselves by remaining mysteries. Through the chamber's window, they could see a human exchange student in the Academy's garden. The young man sat sketching, each stroke of his pencil leaving tiny ripples in reality. Around him, alien students watched in mixed fascination and instinctive unease as his drawings began to lift from the page, becoming real in ways that defied scientific explanation. But the pattern you discovered, Junith protested, the connection between human imagination and quantum manipulation, was never a pattern at all. Kithrix interrupted, their scales settling into the deep blue of certainty. We sought to understand human abilities through science, to classify and quantify them. But their gift exists precisely because they don't do that. The professor moved to the window, watching as the human student's drawings danced through the air. Look at him. He's not manipulating quantum fields or bending dimensional barriers. He's just creating. The moment we define it, measure it, try to understand it, that's the moment it stops being what it is. The last of the research data faded from the displays. Kithrix reached for the crystal cube from Captain Zixtal, the one that showed different events each time it was played. With deliberate care, they placed it in a quantum-shielded container. What will you tell the Council? Junith asked. The truth, Kithrix replied, their scales shimmering with subtle amusement. That human capabilities remain undefined and unquantifiable. That further research would be counterproductive. That some questions answer themselves by remaining unasked. In the garden below, the human student had attracted a small crowd. His drawings had evolved into complex structures of light and possibility, each one violating a dozen laws of physics. Yet he seemed entirely unaware of doing anything unusual, simply enjoying the act of creation. The precursors were right. Kithrix continued softly. The galaxy's greatest gift to humanity was letting them believe that nothing is truly impossible. Their power isn't in breaking the rules of reality. It's in never quite believing those rules were anything but guidelines in the first place. Junith's scales shifted to show understanding. And our power is in knowing when to keep silent. Kithrix turned from the window. Humanity's gift to the galaxy isn't their ability to imagine impossible things into being. It's the reminder that perhaps nothing is truly impossible until we decide it is. The professor gathered their personal effects, leaving behind all traces of their research. In the garden, the human students' creations had begun to fade, returning to simple drawings on paper. But they had existed, however briefly, simply because someone had imagined them without questioning whether they could. Kithrix's scales settled into the peaceful green of acceptance as they left the chamber for the last time. Some powers were too profound to be studied, too fundamental to be understood. The true gift was in letting them remain wonderful, unexplained, and free.